Daphne was overdue with this baby like she had been with Betsy, of course. This was unknown to Matthew. He raved about the differences of the pregnancies. He began to think that the baby was a boy because of this. Daphne knew in her heart that she was having another baby girl, but kept her premonition to herself. Matthew stayed awake every night to make sure that his wife was able to sleep. She was miserable and ready to give birth, so he wanted to be on high alert in case she went into labor in the middle of night. He rarely got restful sleep in the week leading up to the baby's birth. Matthew had been correct to be vigilant because Daphne's water broke in the middle of the night one very early morning. He allowed himself a prenatal panic because this was the first time he would be present for the birth of his child. Matthew's sister, Elizabeth, traveled to Willow Creek to watch the girls so Daphne and Matthew could go to the hospital to have the baby. She was excited for another niece or nephew to love. Lucy had tagged along with her daughter to be there for her grandchildren. Her health had steadily declined since she lost her sight. She was deeply suffering, but never let her daughter-in-law or grandbabies see her like that. She felt Daphne's belly and felt so happy that she was able to experience being a grandmother, even if she could not see them. She was lucky to even be here, and woke up from her deep sleep because she heard the ruckus happening in the living room. She hugged her sister and wished her luck with her delivery. She whispered that she would only accept a new sister. The rest of the household had woken up because of the excitement of Daphne being in labor. Betsy hugged her mummy tightly. Daphne savored her little girl's hug as this would be the final hug she would get as her only baby. Daphne's contractions began to heighten after this. She wanted to stay with her Betsy for just a little bit longer, but they needed to get to the hospital. This baby was coming. When Daphne and Matthew got to the hospital, the doctor examined her. It was determined that she was about halfway dilated, but her labor was progressing quickly, just as it had with Betsy. Matthew held his wife closely and they swayed together. He rubbed her back and tried to make her as comfortable as possible. He was grateful that he was able to be there for Daphne during every step of the way of this labor. He had missed out on so much with Betsy. Daphne felt so at ease with Matthew by her side. This was how their life was supposed to go. After swaying with Matthew, Daphne felt the familiar urge to push. She was grateful for the fast labors that her body produced. She remembered her mum's labor with an and how long and painful it was for her. She couldn't wait to hold the first baby that she made with her husband. Daphne was escorted to the delivery room. The doctor forbade Matthew from being with his wife while she gave birth. He claimed that it was a place for only women to be. Daphne was beside herself with despair. She wanted her husband next to her desperately. Matthew sat in the waiting room and wept because he was missing yet another birth of a child. She tried to conjure the strength she had when giving birth to Betsy all alone. She knew that Matthew was just outside of the room. At some point, nature kicked in and she pushed with all of her might. Matthew would hold his child in his arms. Very soon, Daphne gave birth to another healthy baby girl. She hoped the child would be a spitting image of her father. She decided to name her second daughter Charlene, after the sister she never had the chance to meet. She knew her mom would be so happy to have a little granddaughter named Charlene. She wished her mother could have met her. Daphne held her sweet Charlene in her arms for the very first time. She had always imagined what her and Matthew's child would look like, but Charlene was more beautiful than she ever could have imagined. She took after her husband, which she was very happy about. Matthew finally had a child who looked like him. He would be thrilled. Their family felt complete in a way with baby Charlene. Matthew spent every waking moment with Charlene after they returned from the hospital. He was beside himself with disappointment for not being in the room with his wife while his perfect angel was being born. He felt so happy that Charlene looked like him. However, this only fueled his belief that something wasn't right with Betsy. that somehow he hadn't fathered his firstborn daughter, and was beyond excited to have another girl in the family. She made silly faces at the baby to make her giggle. She introduced herself as her big sister and told her how much she loved Charlene. Betsy was less enthusiastic about having a younger sister. She enjoyed being the center of her parents' attention and did not want to share. She had mixed emotions. She was happy to have a sibling closer to her age, but was sad that she wasn't the baby anymore. She would grow to love Charlene. The date that Daphne had been dreading for a long time had finally come. Her baby sister was aging into a teenager. Her baby sister aging up was a reminder that she herself was getting older every day, and blew out her candles with the newfound excitement and wonder for getting older. She made a wish to find a boy that loved her as much as Matthew loved her sister. They found each other when they were so young, and then wanted a high school sweetheart more than anything. Anne's teenager trait is that she is self-absorbed. Her childhood had caused her to create a complex that she was better than most people because she was so smart. Her teenager aspiration is to be an admired icon. She wanted to be popular in school finally. She wanted her peers to think she was as great as she thought she was. It was a surprise to everyone when out of the blue, Norman Walters showed up at the Barton residence 4 years after his daughter was born. He didn't write or give warning of his arrival. Daphne rushed outside to greet him and to inquire of his reasoning for showing up unannounced. Against her better judgment, she gave Norman a hug. She was grateful that he was alive and seemingly okay. Daphne gave him a list of rules before coming inside. She told him that Matthew still did not know that Betsy was Norman's daughter and desperately wanted to keep it that way. Norman agreed to every turn. He begged to meet his daughter. The almost 4 years of not knowing what kind of child she was growing up to be was deeply affecting him. Daphne was terrified that this could all blow up in her face, as she agreed and let him inside because he deserved to meet his daughter. She had already taken so much from him. She could at least give him this one gift. Betsy greeted her mommy's friend and said the patch on his eye made him look like a pirate. She told him that she really liked pirates. Norman stared at his child in amazement. Norman asked the girl if he could give her a hug. Betsy was normally weary of strangers but felt oddly drawn to the man. Something about his hug felt special. Norman gave his daughter a gift, much to Betsy's excitement. He gave her a few things from his childhood, including his favorite teddy bear as a kid, his sister's doll, and an heirloom given from generation to generation in his family. Betsy was overcome with joy to be given so many nice gifts that she asked for another hug. Norman's heart swelled with love for his daughter as he held his little girl in his arms for the first time. He wished so much had played out differently, and he was able to be her dad. Matthew returned home from work to find his best friend in his house. He found the situation quite peculiar, but was happy to see his friend after so long. They hugged and he could feel Norman shaking. Norman chatted nervously to his friend and stated that he needed to get going soon, that it was only a quick visit. Matthew insisted that he stay for dinner so they could catch up. He asked if Norman finally found a girl. Norman responded that he was still hung up on a woman he met during the war and glanced at Daphne. Everything clicked for Matthew in that moment with Norman and Betsy sitting side by side. She was a spitting image of him. Matthew laid in bed that night, unable to sleep. His wife had slept with his best friend and had produced the child that has been his daughter since her first breath. He felt unimaginable sadness, but couldn't bring himself to feel betrayed. It was he who stopped responding to Daphne all those years ago. She found comfort in the arms of someone who felt familiar. Could he get past this? Daphne had begun puffing heavily since Norman's visit. She knew that her husband had figured out Betsy's true paternity, and yet he had not said a word and continued life as normal. Part of her wanted him to scream and yell at her, but that wasn't the type of person he was. It was worse somehow that she didn't suffer any consequences for her actions. She wanted him to punish her in some way for laying with another. Daphne could not afford to spiral. She had Charlene to care for, as guilty as she felt for what she did. It was comforting to look at her daughter and see the man she loved reflected in her little face. Despite it all, they still had a happy life and a beautiful family together. If Matthew could forgive her and move on, maybe she could finally forgive herself and allow herself to fully be happy with the life they created. Time had moved so quickly in the weeks following Norman's visit. It was as if Daphne blinked and her little Charlene was already aging into an infant. Charlene's infant trait is that she is intense and made an effort every single day to sharpen her mind in some way. She wanted to be the smartest student in her school, so she had to work at it. She played chess by herself most days to become a master at the game. She also read books on different skills she wanted to learn. She wanted to be the first woman in Willow Creek to go to college for something science-related. She read books on rocket science because there were many developments happening for space travel and she wanted to be a part of it. She could tell that her sister and brother-in-law were going through something, so she helped with her baby sisters when she could. Betsy loved when Anne would read to her, so she tried to read to her at least once a day. She loved their bond. Norman coming to meet his daughter for the first time really put things into perspective for Daphne. She wondered about her own father. Was he still alive? Did he think about her constantly like Norman did about Betsy? She went to the library to search for any indication of her father's whereabouts. She remembered how much he loved her as a girl. He wouldn't leave without a sound reason for doing so. She searched newspaper after newspaper in every city. She even checked in Del Sol Valley, where her father grew up. She found an obituary of the grandfather she had never met. He passed away some years ago due to alcoholism. Daphne was in the library for hours searching and was beginning to give up hope of ever finding her father. She stumbled across an ad in the Moonwood Mill paper. And Atticus Bennett was advertising his woodworking pieces and his world-famous honey. She found him. And had a feeling that Daphne and Matthew had been quietly going through something for nearly a year. So much so that they forgot their birthdays. They had done so much for her that she wanted to repay the favor. She made them a birthday cake. The cake was poorly made, but she put love into it, so surely that counted. Daphne was absolutely beside herself with gratitude for the act of kindness and displayed for she and her husband. She had silently worried this past year that Anne had become so self-absorbed that she didn't care about their family anymore. This proved her wrong. Anne was such a beautiful girl inside and out, and was so happy that she was able to give her a second chance at a happy life. She hoped that she had done a good enough job and her baby sister would change the world someday. Daphne blew out her candles and hoped that this next phase of life would bring reunions and happiness for her entire family. Daphne was now an adult. She didn't know where the time had gone. Matthew blew out his candles and wished to forgive his wife. They had gone through the motions for the past year, but he knew he was detached. He hoped this next phase of life would allow him to once again enjoy his marriage. Matthew was now an adult, but somehow he still felt youthful and full of hope. Daphne kept up with the times by cutting her long and beautiful hair off. She hoped the change would make her husband attracted to her again. He stayed with her despite knowing that Betsy wasn't his biological daughter. She knew now that he wasn't going to ask for a divorce, but she couldn't keep living in this purgatory. She loved him so much and didn't want their years as adults to be filled with distance and resentment. She finally got the nerve to speak with him. She admitted everything for the first time out loud. He was shocked to finally hear her utter the words. She asked if he still loved her and if they were going to make it through this. He told her that he felt closure now that she finally said the words. He had suspicions for years but understood her actions given the circumstances. He apologized for being distant for so long. He told her that even though Betsy was not biologically his, she was his daughter, and he loved her just as much as his other two children. For the first time in over a year, Matthew and Daphne shared a kiss. Daphne finally felt at peace for the first time since she found out she was pregnant with Betsy. They would get through this together because they were soulmates. This was but a bump in the road as husband and wife. They would grow old together. Matthew asked if Daphne would like to make love. Daphne could not believe that this was finally happening. She had wondered during the last year if she would ever get to be intimate with her husband again. The married couple had a day they would never forget. It was beautiful and cathartic for both. Matthew wanted to try for another baby. Daphne agreed. Now that things were better with her husband, Daphne thought it was the best time to finally travel to Moonwood Mill to search for her father. She arrived at the residence that was listed in the newspaper ad. Atticus was shocked and overjoyed to see his now adult daughter. They hugged for the first time in 25 years. Atticus detailed his reasoning for leaving she and her siblings. It had never occurred to Daphne that the reason for leaving she and her family was because her father was gay. Atticus asked if she thought less of him because his soulmate happened to be a man. Daphne reassured her father that she would never think less of him for being with the person he loved, but she wished he could have stayed in her life. Daphne shared her entire life with her father, Matthew, the war, her mother and Betsy. All of it. Atticus was heartbroken to hear of Sarah's passing and blamed himself for her fate. He was shocked to hear he had a fourth child and would love to meet her. He had many years to make up for, but he wanted to be in his children's life once again. Tom Barton came inside from the garden and greeted his love. He was shocked to see Daphne. Atticus explained who she was to Tommy, and he was overjoyed that one of their children had found them. Atticus informed his daughter that Tom's children were Matthew and Elizabeth. It all made sense to Daphne now. Lucy had come into their lives because her husband had run away with her mother's husband. Her father's gay lover was the father of her husband. Part of that felt strange, almost like a wrong conjoining of their families twice. However, her father was clearly in love, and because of his departure, she found her soulmate. Daphne hugged Tom and told him that she had heard so much about him. Her husband had spoken about his father on many occasions, but it was clear that Matthew still held much resentment for his father. All Tom wanted to know was if his children were happy. Daphne told him that Matthew turned out to be an incredible husband and father. Elizabeth recently got married. They turned out okay. Tom was relieved that he didn't permanently screw up his children.
The following video contains visuals of fake bodies from The Sims 4. This is a video game, and this account does not promote or endorse such behavior.
Daphne took drag after drag of several ciggies before she went inside of her home. She knew her husband would be outraged to know the truth about his father. She had no idea that discovering the truth of her own father would also uncover Matthew's father. They were finally in a good place, and she didn't want to hurt him. She worried about what this would do to him. She had never met her father and always said she hated him. Daphne figured it was best to be upfront and truthful with Matthew. She had kept a secret from him for several years, and that nearly broke them. She disclosed that their fathers were gay and ran away together so they could love freely. Matthew could not believe what he was hearing. He always thought his father was the epitome of masculinity. His whole life was a lie. Matthew's emotions erupted from his body. He sobbed into his wife's shoulder. This was a difficult revelation to come to terms with. Part of him understood, but the other part hated him for leaving his mother with 2 children to raise. The entire family had to put a plug in the unbelievable revelation of their father's affair to celebrate Betsy's birthday. It was the worst time to have a birthday, but it was a much-needed distraction to the chaos. Daphne hated the fact that her eldest child was growing up so fast. She felt like life was slipping away from her. Before Betsy's party started, Daphne checked in with her baby sister. She had yet to tell her that she had found their father, afraid that the news would be too much for her. Anne's life was in a good place, so she kept her mouth shut. Matthew held his not-so-little girl as she blew out her candles. He hoped that her life would be a normal one despite her confusing parentage. He would be her father and support her no matter what. Betsy's childhood trait is that she is a Virgo. This means she wants to master everything and loves hard. Her childhood aspiration is to be a musical prodigy. Anne met a boy at school named Freddie. At first, she was not interested because he was not an academic and known in school for being a bad boy eventually. She gave in after countless attempts of winning over her affection. It felt nice to be wanted for once. Freddie had a bit of a temper. She was 10 minutes late to their first date and he complained about it. She admired his passion for her. Their first date was at the local carnival that was in town. Freddie ordered food and drink for himself, but did not offer to pay for Anne. Anne did not mind. She was a strong and independent woman and did not need a man to pay for her meal. She was simply happy to be asked on a date. She ordered her drink and paid for herself. Freddie received his food and drink, and felt awkward during this date because she had never been on a date with a boy before. She did not know how to act and basically forgot how to talk. She nearly choked on her drink. As the sun went down and she spent more time with Freddie, the more comfortable she felt. He seemed to have paid attention to her for a long time before asking her on a date. He knew most things about her. He knew that she was an orphan and applauded her perseverance, and was taken aback by his words because kids at school only ever made fun of her for the worst thing to happen in her life. But not Freddie, and felt very infatuated with the boy who she never paid a second glance to before. He saw her for who she was, not her flaws. She felt on top of the world when she was with Freddie. She never thought she would kiss a boy on the first date, but Freddie transformed her world with just one date. She hoped that she and Freddie's love story would be just like her caregivers. Charlene aged into a toddler. Daphne wished for her to look even more like her daddy. She loved watching her grow up and have the same mannerisms as her husband. It made all the pain she suffered worth it. Charlene's toddler trait is that she is clingy. As Daphne was cooking dinner one night and begged her sister to allow her new boyfriend to join them, she desperately wanted Daphne's approval of Freddie. He meant a great deal to her, but so did her family's opinion. Daphne begrudgingly agreed to host Freddie for dinner. Betsy was very excited for her older sister to be dating someone, so she happily set the table for the dinner. Their house had to look perfect for Freddie, and greeted her new boyfriend with a hug. She was over the moon that he was in her house and meeting her family. They shared a passionate kiss before they went to the dinner table. She knew that Freddie had a bit of a temper, so this dinner had to be perfect. As always, the lead up to dinner was a hectic affair. Matthew played with Charlene as everyone gathered at the table. Daphne served their dinner and took a long glance at Freddie. She did not like the look of him. She could already tell that he did not deserve her baby sister. Everyone was relatively quiet once dinner started. This was unusual for the Barton bunch. Normally their dinners were a lively affair. Anne looked at her family and begged them with her eyes to start talking. She knew the dinner wasn't going well based on the silence. She didn't understand why her family couldn't see what she saw in Freddie. Daphne finally began to speak. She asked about Freddie's upbringing and things he did in his free time. Freddie spoke of his broken family and his disdain for school. He also spoke about his idea that marriage was for suckers. Daphne asked to speak with them for a moment and left Matthew and Freddie alone. They engaged in small talk for a short while but realized they had nothing in common. Matthew did not get a good vibe from the boy. Back in Anne's bedroom, Daphne yelled at her baby sister for her taste in men. She said that Freddie was a bottom feeder and didn't deserve her, and argued that Daphne barely gave him a chance and begged her to get to know Freddie more. Daphne said that she saw all she needed to see. The boy reminded her of Bradley, and that was all the instinct to know that Freddie was not the boyfriend, and would not accept this, and said that they were soulmates just like she and Matthew were. Betsy and Charlene excused themselves into the living room. Sensing that an argument was about to ensue between their parents and eldest sister, Betsy drew pictures while Charlene rocked on the rocking horse. Charlene had too much fun and ended up falling asleep on the rocking chair. After the dinner was over and complained about what her sister had said, she thought that it was ludicrous that they would not give Freddie a chance. They had unrealistic expectations for her. To Anne's utter surprise, Freddie got in her face and told her that the whole ordeal was her fault. He told her that she needed to fix it or she was worthless, and retreated to her room and cried. She was upset with Daphne and Matthew because they were being unfairly harsh on Freddie. On the other hand, Freddie was cruel to her tonight. She knew he had a temper, as she didn't think he was the type of person to get in her face. She didn't know what to think about anyone in her life anymore. Betsy did her homework after the commotion was over. She desperately wanted to be like her big sister. She was so intelligent and determined. Betsy just wasn't. She struggled heavily in math, and did her homework after everyone went to sleep. She knew she wanted to do great things. She had to be the best, no matter if she fell in love or her family didn't like her decisions. It was her destiny to be great. She cleaned up the kitchen that night. Her sister was wrong about her and her love with Freddie. She would make her believe.